So there we go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. Kind of cold out there, hey? A little bit unpleasant.
Is it gonna snow?
What's that?
Is it gonna snow again?
Is it gonna snow? I think there's some snow in the forecast for like early next week. I don't know how much it's gonna be or if it'll even show up, but I saw it in the forecast, so maybe. Are you crossing your fingers for snow, or are you? No? We've been there, done that. Yeah, it was weird. Usually we have our snow in February here in Vancouver, so it was kind of weird to have it in December, but. So you guys want to start? Okay, here we go. So, yesterday we had our quiz, of course, and I'll give that back to you maybe in a little bit or maybe tomorrow. I'm just going to figure that out. And we will review it, but we'll continue on with what we're doing for the moment, okay? So, on Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday. On Tuesday we talked about what oppression, or we started talking about what oppression was, right? And again, I told you it was something that happens at a societal level, right? It's not really about what individual people do. It's more about how a society operates, right? And who gets advantages and benefits, and who gets denied those benefits, right? And so we talked about dominant and minoritized groups. I think I told you that. Remember that the dominant group is the one that has kind of social and institutional and legal power, but they're not necessarily the majority, right? So here in Canada, for instance, women are actually the majority. There are, I think if you look at the numbers, there's about 52% women and 48% men. So men are in the minority, actually, but men still hold kind of an unequal share of the power, right? Again, if we go to a place like apartheid South Africa, most of the people living in apartheid South Africa are, or were, should I say, black, but it was the white Afrikaners that had power, right? So it's not really about numbers, it's about who holds power, right? So yeah, we talked about the fact that it's a little different than prejudice and discrimination, which we also talked about. Prejudice and discrimination usually happen on kind of an individual basis, okay? And yeah, oppression occurs when someone's power, or someone's prejudice, I should say, is backed by historical and social and institutional power, okay? So basically, the dominant group has the ability to make the rules and enforce them. The dominant group has the ability to kind of control social messages and spread them. The dominant group has the ability to kind of define what's normal, okay, and what's cool and what isn't, kind of thing, okay. And so we read an article. We talked about theories of prejudice and discrimination here, and we got through kind of the first section. And yesterday, just before we left, we reviewed stereotype and prejudice and discrimination, and I said, remember, it's a thinking, feeling, acting thing, right? The stereotype kind of gives you the knowledge. Prejudice is kind of your feeling about that stereotype, or your feeling about that group of people or animals based on your stereotypes. And then discrimination is kind of what you do or don't do, right? You can discriminate against people or animals, in my example, based on your prejudices. Now, remind me again, in number 3, what happened in Jane Elliott's class. They did kind of an experiment.
The blue-eyed children and the black one.
And what was the experiment? What did they do?
She said that the black-eyed children tend to be smarter.
Then they told that to the class, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, they spread a rumor that brown-eyed kids were smarter than brown-eyed kids are smarter than blue-eyed kids. And then what kind of happened?
It
it did kind of happen, right? It came true, right? The sort of stereotype that was released into this classroom, it was it kind of came true, right? And of course, Jane Elliott, the teacher, she didn't believe it, of course, right? She knew it wasn't true. But again, she watched, and the kids started to act out those ideas, right? The brown-eyed kids actually started to perform better because they thought that they thought that they were good performers. The blue-eyed kids actually started to perform worse. Their test scores and their assignment scores went down, right? The brown-eyed kids started to kind of pick on the blue-eyed kids and discriminate against them, right? And so, again, this is just like the sweatpants, Regina's sweatpants thing. An arbitrary social rule, if everyone believes it, has power, right? And it's the same thing with stereotypes, right? Stereotypes, if everybody believes them to be true, they can be really powerful. And people who are the subject of those stereotypes can actually start to act out those ideas, right? So, and again, it seems kind of weird, right? It seems like that wouldn't happen or shouldn't happen, especially if it's a negative stereotype, right? You don't want to believe that about yourself, but sometimes those things have a way of kind of soaking in, without us really realizing it, right? Again, sometimes we're socialized, we absorb social messages, and we don't really know where they come from, right? We don't really know that we've absorbed them. I think the last thing we were talking about on Wednesday was why stereotypes remain so stable over time, and why is that? We talked about a few examples of stereotypes that are really kind of have been around for sometimes decades and sometimes hundreds of years. Why is that? Cleo, why are stereotypes so stable, so sticky? Because of the exception thing? What's the exception thing? Say that one more time. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the idea that even though we might believe that, let's say dogs, for instance, dogs is always a safe example. If I like dogs, right? I think they're great, but do I honestly believe that every single dog out there is a wonderful animal? No, right? Some of them are awful, right? They're loud, they're barky, they're bitey, they haven't been socialized very well or trained. They are, they're hellish, right? They're little demons, right? And so, yeah, I know that not every dog is wonderful, right? And so when I meet one of these horrible, awful dogs, it doesn't cause me to change my belief because I know not every single dog is wonderful, right? So when I meet an exception, I'm like, oh, there's a crappy dog, right? But that's okay because my stereotype doesn't have to change because I know that there are exceptions, right? I know that not every single dog is like I believe them to be, right? So it doesn't so when you encounter something that should challenge your belief, it doesn't because you know there's always exceptions. What else? Why else are they so sticky? Why are they so stable? Avatej, what do you think?
Because people recall those facts that support the stereotype.
Okay. They recall those facts that support. Okay. Give me a little bit more there. You're right, I think, but they recall those facts.
Like they remember bad things more than the good things.
Oh, okay. Actually, that's a different thing, but that's something we didn't talk about on Wednesday either. The idea that humans tend to remember the negatives much easier than the positives, right? We tend to, if something bad happens to us or something negative happens, we tend to recall those things a lot more vividly sometimes than the really happy stuff, right? Do you think that's true? Like in your own experience, do you find you have an easier time remembering like bad things that happen to you than good things. Is that true? Yeah. That kind of stinks though, right? Like, wouldn't you rather remember the happier stuff? Yeah. Yeah, that's a different thing, Avitaj, but that's important to point out too, right? Is that as humans, I think we tend to do this, and I think it's an evolutionary thing, right? That's what, if you have a negative experience, imagine our ancestors running around in the wild, hunting and gathering. If you had a bad experience and it was dangerous and it almost killed you, do you think it'd be a good idea to remember that? Yeah, right? That'd be a great idea because, again, for an animal to survive, it has to learn, right? And if it gets into a situation and it doesn't get killed, but it's close, it's a good idea for that animal to remember that situation so that it doesn't do that again, right? So that it will survive. And so, yeah, when bad things happen to us, or even if we feel silly or embarrassed, or we trip and everybody sees us trip or something like that, we tend to remember that very vividly, right? Because again, our brain is trying to keep us alive, right? It's trying to make sure we remember situations that were dangerous or harmful or traumatic so that we don't go back there again, right? So yeah, our brain is it's trying to help us out, right? It's trying to keep us alive, but sometimes it'd be nice to forget a few of those embarrassing, humiliating moments, right? Yeah, so actually that's a good one, Avitaj. That's a little different than what we're talking about, but it's, yeah, people remember negative things better than they do positive sometimes, right? And they also talk about them more too, right? I used to work in a restaurant when I was going to university, and they always, like, you want to treat your customers well, but one of the things they would say to us is that, do not let a customer leave unhappy if you can avoid it, right? If they're unhappy, we've got to do something to fix it. We've got to buy their meal or give them a free dessert or apologize to them or do whatever we have to make them happy. Because once they go out, once they leave the restaurant and they've had a bad experience, they're probably going to tell like 10 people about it. Oh, I went to Earl's last night and it was the worst. Here's what happened, right? And they'll tell all their friends. But if they went there and they had a good meal and it was nice and they had a good time, they'll probably tell like 1 or 2 people, right? Bad news travels much faster than good news, right? So not only do we remember when bad things happen, but we spread it around faster, right? We tell everybody what an awful time we had because the food was cold and took forever and our waiter smelled like pot, right? We will spread that around to everybody. So yeah, there's the exception doesn't, the exception kind of proves the rule idea. There's the idea that we seem to remember negative experiences much better and we seem to spread them around much better. Why else are stereotypes so stable over time? Particularly negative, but even positive ones. Why are they so stable? Why don't they go away? You think what?
I think Avitaj's point
That's
already proved strong.
That's a strong point?
Yes, it's strong.
It is a strong point, but there's more. Or more. I don't know, what do you think?
Very difficult to break. Like once you create a stereotype, it's like doesn't go away so easily.
Yes, but why? Because
For the spread thing,
because what?
maybe for the spread thing, like you just tell people and kind of when you're convinced, you can convince other people.
Okay. Can you give me just a little more? There's like 2 things that you're right on the edge of there. When you're convinced that you tell people other things?
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
give your example.
Okay.
I was in a restaurant and the service was just so awful.
Yeah.
I would convince myself that if I go there
Yeah.
So I will tell, I'm not sure, like my family, and I will convince them that it's off. And maybe it was just my waiter. Maybe there are other ones
Yeah.
that are great. But I'm just convinced, and that's the point.
Yeah.
Why you should go there.
Right. That's true. I'm gonna add something into your thing, and because that is something we do, right? We kind of share information, right? We interact with each other. We tell people good places to go, but also places they should avoid, right? But if I take it a step further, we're also kind of, it's part of our socialization, right? It's part of our culture, right? We kind of, some of these things are, some of these kind of stereotypical ideas are kind of baked into culture, right? And as you absorb them, you kind of come to believe them too, right? And sometimes sometimes you, shoot, I'm a little foggy this morning. I feel like I'm having trouble like keeping my thoughts on track. It's part of our socialization, right? So some of these ideas, maybe our parents have certain stereotypes or beliefs, and they kind of pass them down to us, right? Maybe on purpose, or maybe just by accident, right? Without even meaning to. And so, yeah, sometimes these stereotypes become part of our culture, part of our socialization, and they just get passed down generation after generation, right? Again, maybe explicitly, right? Maybe on purpose, or maybe just kind of by accident, right? They just get passed down, and so they kind of they become part of the operating system, if you will, right? They become part of our operating system, and so yeah, we inherit them. I certainly did, right? Growing up in the culture I grew up in, I definitely inherited some cultural stereotypes, right? I learned them, right? And of course I'm unlearning them later, but I learned them to begin with, right? Maybe one more thing. David, do you know what it is? The what?
Like the impact of algorithm because
Okay.
yeah, like when you see someone like they like something and you feel and you hear this story about nothing and nothing
Yeah.
and you accept that.
Okay. So like you kind of you pick them up from other people or from your experiences?
So like it's about like how
Like a crowd?
it's like people surround you if they feel like something.
Yeah.
Then
Okay.
they might like accept.
Yeah, and I think that might be kind of part of the socialization idea, right? That like, yeah, you're surrounded by people in a society and you pick up how other people feel about things, right? Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah.
You kind of you know how people, you see how other people react, and then you kind of feel the need to kind of go along with it sometimes, right? Or you feel kind of social pressure to agree, right? Yeah, that's true. Arena, what do you think? One more thing? Why stereotypes are so stable? It's difficult to find a premise of why it's not true? Okay, well, why might that be difficult? We were talking about it on Wednesday. Why is it difficult to kind of disprove ideas that or beliefs that we already have? So remember what we talked about? It was another way in which the human brain worked. I thought Avitaj was going there, but then he went somewhere else, but that was okay. But do you remember us talking about confirmation bias? Okay, so Confirmation bias is, again, it's kind of it's a logical fallacy, right? It's a way in which our brain doesn't work logically, right? Because our brains are amazing, but they're not computers. They don't adhere to perfect logic all the time, right? They kind of work the way that they work. And one of the things that they often do is that they search out and remember information that confirms what they already believe, okay? So if we think that dogs are great, we will constantly notice good dogs, right? We'll constantly see them. Maybe, we'll see them in real life. Every time we see a dog, we're like, oh, he's so cute, right? And we reinforce our belief that dogs are good, right? Because we notice good dogs everywhere. And when we think about dogs, it's very easy for us to remember all those good dogs, right? Did we meet crappy dogs? Sure, we saw crappy dogs, right? But then we promptly forgot about them because they didn't really confirm our belief that dogs are wonderful, right? So we have our brains have a tendency to kind of look for and seek out and remember information that confirms our beliefs. And the stuff that doesn't, we kind of just ignore it, right? It's just an exception. Whatever. Your brain kind of just throws it out the window and says, whatever. That's not, in one ear and out of your mind. And it's gone, right? So again, that's not great. It kind of inhibits our logical thinking, if you will. But it's a way in which our brains work, right? So we have to be careful about that because, again, if we have a negative stereotype, right? If I hate dogs, then I'm going to seek out and remember all of those bad dogs that I saw, right? And when someone says dogs are great, I'm going to say, what, are you crazy? I've seen every dog I see out there is awful, right? Barky, bitey, they're peeing all over, horrible creatures, right? But again, you have this belief and you are noticing and remembering all of those bad dogs, right? The other person who loves dogs, they're noticing and remembering all the good dogs, right? And then they're both arguing because they're like, are you crazy? There's so many good dogs out there. What do you mean? They're all horrible, right? And again, both people's experience is kind of valid, but also not reflective of everything, right? Everyone's kind of seeing what they already think they want to see, if you will. So these stereotypes have a good morning. These stereotypes have a tough time going away for all of these reasons, right? Our brains tend to remember things in a particular way. We tend to think about things in a particular way. Stereotypes become part of our culture and socialization sometimes, and we hand them down. And of course, there's the exception to the rule thing, right? Where we know that any stereotype is not 100% true. So even if we experience something that challenges that stereotype, again, we throw it out the window, right? Because it's just an exception, right? They're weird. That's a weird thing, but I'm still correct, right? Okay, so that brings us to number 5. So the question here is that there's 4 functions, of prejudice. And this is kind of a sociological theory thing, which we won't really go into, but I'll tell you about it anyway. It's a functionalist theory, okay? And so they have these in sociology, they have these in anthropology and a few other disciplines. And functionalists believe that if something exists, it must have a function, okay? It must be doing something for society or for some people in society. Everything exists because it has some sort of use, right, for society. If it didn't have any use, it wouldn't exist. Okay, so that's kind of how functionalists look at society. Everything has a purpose, right? Everything does something. Even something like poverty, for instance, right? There's lots of people living in poverty in societies around the world. A functionalist would say, well, poverty clearly exists for some reason, right? They might say, well, it's motivation, right? People get up and go to work every morning because they don't want to wind up in poverty, right? They don't want to wind up not being able to feed themselves or clothe themselves, right? So some people being in poverty is motivation for the rest of us to get out of bed and go to work, People might say, a functionalist might say, well, poverty exists because it gives charitable organizations something to do, right? It allows charitable organizations to exist and function and do good for the community, right? It allows people to feel good about themselves maybe when they donate to charities that help out people in poverty, right? Allows us to feel good, right? So there's probably more, but those are kind of some ways in which poverty could be seen as useful, right? Again, it's not really useful to the people in poverty, right? They're suffering and it's not great, right? It's a tough way to live. So it's not useful for them, but it has uses for other people. And so it exists, right? So here, from a functionalist perspective, they're saying that prejudice, even though it's not a great thing, it must have a function, right? It must be useful in some way in order to exist, right? So it does exist. What might be, what's the first function of prejudice according to this article? Knowledge. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, yeah, it explains our experience, right? So we go through the world, things happen to us, right? We meet certain kinds of people, we have certain kinds of experiences, and again, we talked about this earlier, but people kind of want to know what it means, right? We want to understand our experiences, right? We don't just go through, maybe that's the wonderful thing about dogs, is they go through their life, they don't understand any of their experiences, but they seem to be having a pretty good time, right? But humans want to know what things mean. They want to understand things. And so sometimes prejudices give us information about the world, right? What people are like, what animals are like, what foods are like, weather, all the things that we like and dislike. Prejudices can give us, can help us kind of understand and describe the world, right? What's number 2? Who am I going to talk to? Chen, give me number 2. What's the second function? What?
Oh, prejudice.
You have prejudice. Second function. One is knowledge. Second one, it has a article said they were 4. I'll come back to you. Cleo, do you have number 2? No? Adjustive? Okay, what's the adjustive function about? It's what? It's instrumental? Let's see. Oh, that's not the right one. Second one. So there's an I think I remember what that one's about. I just want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing here. 'Cause that would be bad. Right. Okay. So right. Adjustive function. So what does that mean? It's also called a. Oh yeah, let's just stick with adjustive. Yeah. So what's it say here? It's an attitude becomes associated in people's minds with rewards and punishments. If you share an attitude that others have, they will reward you with approval or perhaps more material things. So this is kind of like being one of the group, right? This is like expressing values that society has, right? And when you kind of stand up and you say, yes, I value that too, or yes, I believe that too, other people kind of pat you on the back, right? If Avatej was to ask me, hey man, do you watch soccer? Do you watch football? What team do you watch? If he was to ask me, there's a right answer to that question, isn't there? There's a right answer, right? And so if I say Barcelona, you're going to be like, you're the man, right? If I say some other team, like AFC Richmond or something, you're going to be like, What's wrong with you? So he will reward me, right, if I kind of express my positive prejudice for the right team. Although if I express my positive prejudice for the wrong team, he's going to punish me, right? He's going to be like, what are you talking about? Right? They're horrible. So that kind of happens all the time, right? We are expected to kind of express certain values and beliefs, right? We're supposed to be in alignment with them. And when we kind of, when everyone around us is kind of feeling a certain way, and I think this is, David, this is kind of almost what you were talking about, right? Is that when we express the same values as the people around us, we get rewarded, right? And maybe it has to do with music, maybe it has to do with celebrities, maybe it has to do with sports, maybe it has to do with political things, maybe it has to do with social justice things, right? Maybe it's even a small thing about friends, right? And do people like this person over here or not, right? So when we express the correct values, right, and the correct beliefs, people reward us for it, right? So it allows us to kind of fit in, I guess, right? So prejudice has a function of allowing people to fit in. If you share the same prejudice, it kind of, connects you to other people. Again, some negative prejudices connect people, and that's not great, but they connect people nonetheless. What's the third one? Crazy, what's the third one? Okay. Okay, Arina, go for it.
Value expressive function.
Okay, what does that mean?
Reaching self-expression.
Okay. Can you think of, so it allows you to, in expressing your values, you are expressing who you are, right? So this is an identity piece. The adjustive function is kind of like fitting in with other people, right? The what's it called? Oh yeah, the value expressive function is that in expressing your values, you are defining who you are, right? So Avatej being a fan of Barcelona, that's part of who you are, right? You're expressing who you are. Can you think of other examples in which people express their positive or negative prejudices to sort of state who they are? Maybe what?
Dog lovers.
Yeah, dog lovers, particularly people who are super into dogs and super into their pets. That's a piece of their identity, right? And so they're very vocal about their dogs. They love dogs, and so that's part of who they are, right? And so they express themselves that way. People do it with political parties, right? If you're a strong supporter of a political party, you might talk about them and how they're the best, and that forms a piece of your identity, right? There's all kinds of examples of this. And the last one, what's the last one? Okay, what does that mean? Okay, the protection of personal, your ego, right? So sometimes we kind of like, even just in our heads, we kind of criticize others to make ourselves feel better, don't we? Come on, we probably all do it. We're not proud of it. I'm not proud of it. I try not to do it, but I've caught myself, right? I've, not out loud, but in my head, and then I realize what I'm doing. But yeah, so we can kind of make ourselves or make our group feel better by kind of criticizing another group, right? Or making them seem less, right? So again, from a functionalist perspective, criticizing others, especially another group, makes us feel better about ourselves, right? And so again, a safe, the safe example might be a sports team where, you criticize another team to sort of build up your own team, right? And if your own team's having a tough time, it's like, well, at least we're not that team. Those guys are awful, right? So we do that, right? We do that. We don't have to be proud of it. It doesn't have to be something good necessarily, but a sociologist might say, yeah, that prejudice exists for these 4 reasons, right? It tells us about our world. It allows us to kind of connect and form groups with each other. It allows us to kind of express who we are, express our identity. It also gives us a way to kind of maybe temporarily feel better about ourselves while we criticize others. And then we realize what we're doing and we feel worse about ourselves, but that's another thing. So, okay, let's go to this Tajfel's social identity theory. This one is a little bit tricky, but maybe I can help you out with it. What is it? Okay, so individuals naturally strive for a positive self-image. Okay, and so how do we get that positive self-image? How do we get that positive self-image?
In 2 aspects.
What's that?
In 2 aspects.
In 2 aspects? Okay, give me one aspect.
Positive personal identity.
Uh-huh.
And the second one is the positive social identity.
Okay, there's a positive personal identity and a positive social identity. Okay. Let me just. Oh, I see where you are. Oh, I see. Okay, let's not worry about the 2 aspects, because let's just treat this as one. Okay, because they only mention at the end. So let's just try and figure out how this thing works. Okay, so we all want to have a positive self-image, right? We all want to look at ourselves and say, yeah, we're pretty cool, right? And so, according to this theory, what's one of the ways in which we do that? Say again? So we categorize people, right? We divide people up into groups somehow. And then what do we do, Cleo? Okay, you're right. That's a good first step. We kind of categorize people. We divide them up into groups. We kind of put ourselves in one of those groups, right? We're in one group. And then what do? Okay, this is a tricky one. I will give you that. So the idea here is, Cleo was right. We divide people up into groups. Okay, so think about Mean Girls. Okay, think about North Shore High School. Think about the cafeteria. There was all those different social groups, right? The unfriendly black hotties and the band geeks and the burnouts and the Asian nerds and the cool Asians and all those, the jocks and the plastics. Everybody was in there. So we divide society up into groups, just like the high school. Then we kind of need to include ourselves in one of those groups, right? And so let's say the plastics, for instance. Okay, so the world is divided up into groups. The 3 girls are the member of the plastics, and then they kind of need to sort of build up their group, right? And so they kind of try to make their group, sort of as cool as possible, right? Because the better that the group is seen, right? So the higher up the social ladder the group is, the more that kind of group status attaches itself to the members of the group, right? Remember Gretchen when she was being treated poorly by Regina, and she was like, oh, it's better to be in a social group than not in one, right? And one of the reasons that we said she didn't want to be out of the group is that, well, she might lose her status, right? The plastics were kind of at the top of the high school, and if she was kicked out, she would lose that prestige, she would lose that status, right? She would lose that attention. And because of that, she didn't really want to be kicked out, right? And so that's kind of what's happening with this Tajfel's social identity theory, is that group was seen as the highest in the school, right? The one people looked up to. And so because Gretchen was part of that group, she kind of got that status and prestige and respect from everyone else. And so that's kind of what we try to do. We try to sort of make our group the best, because the better that group is, we'll be seen that way as well, right? We'll be seen as a member of the group, right? Why do people like to wear sports jerseys sometimes? I have one. I have a hockey jersey. Have I worn it yet? You've seen me wear it. I'll wear my hockey jersey sometimes. Why do people wear hockey jerseys when they're clearly not on the team?
They like it.
Yeah. It's at Tajfel's social identity theory, right? They're kind of including themselves in the group. It makes them feel closer to the team, right? I wear my Oilers jersey. Have I ever played for the Oilers? I have not. I've never played for the Oilers. But it makes you feel closer. It makes you feel like you're one of the group, right? And if everyone thinks well of the team and you walk in your Oilers jersey, then you get that good feeling too, right? Have you ever seen musicians do that when they're playing, they're playing a show in a town and they'll wear like the sports jersey of that town? Have you ever seen them do that?
No.
No? Okay. Maybe it's a rock and roll thing. But sometimes it happens. Sometimes they'll wear a hockey jersey of the town they're playing in while they're playing their music. And again, that's part of it too, right? They're trying to include themselves in the group. And if the group is well thought of, then they'll be thought of well at the same time, right? So it's a little tricky, but maybe not, right? And finally, some potential solutions to prejudice. What are some potential solutions to prejudice? Because they are sticky, they persist over time. Our brains aren't really on our side sometimes, right? They have a tendency to, sort of do a confirmation bias thing. They tend to, we tend to remember negative things like prejudices more easily. But how can we kind of solve this? Yeah.
Non-competitive contact.
Okay, so if we have two groups and one group has a prejudice against the other, somehow we have to bring these groups into contact, right? Isolation is no good, right? If people have a negative prejudice against dogs and they've never actually met a dog, are they likely to change their mind? No, right? Somehow we have to bring these two groups into contact, right? So that's part of it. What else? What about this contact? 'Cause it's not just any contact. Say one more time.
It also can create something.
It can also create some.
Something like new culture or something like that.
Could be, right? So, and in order to do that, in order to like bring together and sort of start to change culture and change stereotype, what do we kind of need these people to do? Not have sex. This isn't the. That's not what this means. What do we need them to do? To build a connection? Okay. To what? Be one? Okay. Good attempt to read my hands, but not what I'm thinking of. What do they need to do, Cleo? To change, sorry? Let's look at the little experiment here. So this is the Robbers Cave experiment. So again, it's kind of a summer camp kind of situation, right? They take all these young boys, they divide them into two teams, right? The Eagles and the Wolves, I forget what it is. They divide them into two teams. the two teams go off and they do their own thing, right? And interestingly, they develop prejudices against the other team, right? Oh, the Eagles, those guys are the worst, right? The Wolves, ugh, hate those guys, right? They kind of develop their own, and then they compete, right? They compete for prizes. And maybe no surprise, the prejudice gets worse, right? They hate the other team even more, right? Which is strange because some of the boys actually had friends that were on the other team, right? They divided them up at the beginning. And these two are fighting it out, competing for a trophy or prizes or whatever. And they can't stand each other, right? They hate the other team. But then they switch it up and they say, okay, now we've got a challenge where the only way to succeed, the only way to get the reward is to cooperate, right? The Eagles have to work with the Wolves. That's the only way to win the prize. And not shockingly, or maybe shockingly, that cooperation leads to a reduce in prejudice, right? Suddenly the Eagles and the Wolves are on the same team, right? They need each other to accomplish their goal. They need each other to win, right? And so, yeah, prejudices don't go away when we separate people, right? That doesn't work. We need to bring them into contact, but we have to bring them into contact in a way that they're not competing against each other, because that's just going to lead to more prejudice and more bad feelings. We don't want to reinforce a hierarchy that already exists, right? So, for instance, in the United States in, let's say, the 1950s, okay, there was lots of prejudice and racism against Black Americans, right? And Black and white Americans had contact all the time, right? They were interacting all the time, but they were interacting in a way that Black people had kind of the low-level jobs and white people had the high-level jobs, right? So you might have a Black housekeeper, right? Or a Black gardener, or the guy pumping your gas might be Black, right? And so, or serving you in the restaurant. And so, again, white people were kind of on top and Black people were on the bottom. And yeah, they interacted with each other, but it was in a way that the Black people were kind of serving the white people all the time, right? And that doesn't help get rid of prejudice either, right? Because it just allows white people to continue to think that they're better, right? So you need to get people together, you need to get them in contact, but you can't have them competing, because that's no good, and you can't have them interacting in a way that already reinforces that power imbalance, right? You need to sort of get them involved in some kind of equal way. You need to get them to be working on something together, right? And yeah.
So like to find the same similarity?
To find some similarity?
Yeah.
That definitely helps, right? I don't know, I can't speak to your own countries and if you kind of have this challenge in your own countries, but here in Canada, I think that's part of the challenge of Canada and the question we have to answer, right? Is that Canada's full of people from all over the place, right? We have people from probably every country in the world, different religions, right? Different cultures, different languages, different ways of thinking. And the question is, how do we get all those people on Team Canada, right? How do we get all those people, even though we're different and we have different ideas and different beliefs, how do we get everybody kind of pushing in the same direction or pulling in the same direction, right? How do we get everyone kind of cooperating for the same goal, right? Because I think we probably all do have the same goal, right? No matter who you talk to in Canada, where they're from in the world, what their religion is, I think they want to have a nice life, right? A productive life, make some money, be secure, maybe, take care of their family or raise a family, have friends, enjoy their lives, be successful with their career. I think we all kind of want the same things, right? Regardless of where we're from. But, building that is sometimes tricky, right? Getting everyone to kind of go in the same direction and cooperate. And if we can, then, whatever prejudice exists between people will probably decrease, right? When you walk out your front door and you look at your neighbor and you see them and you say, oh, well, they're different, right? They're from a different country, have a different culture, speak a different language. adhere to a different religion, but they're on my team, right? We're all kind of working in the same direction, right? We're cooperating for a shared goal. Right? And again, sometimes that's hard to see, but that's the challenge of a country like Canada. Can we create a set of kind of values and beliefs that we can all work toward? Do we have a set of values and beliefs that, we can all see as our goal, even though, yeah, we're all a little different, right? Can we do that? Right? And if we can, as I say, those prejudicial ideas will go down, right? But again, when we're competing against each other, it doesn't work, right? When we're reinforcing an existing hierarchy, it doesn't work, right? If we simply separate people out, it doesn't work, right? You've got to have people working together toward a common goal. That's the only, well, it's not the only way, but it's a powerful way to reduce prejudice. You okay? You want to take a little break?
Yeah.
Take a little break? Okay. Take a break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about privilege. All right. So success, right? We've made it through. We've made it through this this article. We've talked about some important things: prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes, what they are, how they work, why they're so difficult to get rid of, but maybe some general solutions of how we can do it. Sorry, I'm just going to skip through this because we've talked about it all. There's the dog. Oh, not yet. Okay. Oh, yeah. Right. The other thing that we can say about stereotypes and prejudice is that sometimes we don't deny our prejudices, or we sort of vocally speak about them because we don't kind of see them as prejudice, we see them as fact. Okay? And so, for instance, in the 1950s and maybe the 1960s, a lot of white Americans would very vocally speak out against black Americans. And they would do so in a way that, like, I probably should show you the video, but I won't. That, like, nobody would ever say such racist things today. But people in the 1950s and 60s, they felt very comfortable saying those things because they actually believed the prejudices to be true, right? They didn't believe that they were prejudices. They didn't believe they were prejudiced. They didn't believe they were talking about stereotypes. They thought they were talking about actual fact, right? So they actually thought that, not every white person, but many, thought that black people were actually less than them, right? They were less intelligent, less sophisticated, less hardworking, less moral, right? Or ethical or good or whatever you want to say. They were actually less than them. And so they felt very comfortable saying, you know, no, I don't want any black people in my neighborhood, right? And they would say it, you know, on camera, right? Because they're like, well, you know, this is, we have a nice, respectable neighborhood here, and we want to keep it that way, right? And again, nobody would say that today. That's incredibly racist. But at the time, people thought it wasn't prejudice, it was just fact. And we continue to kind of do some of these things today. We continue to express some of our prejudices because we think that they're based on fact, right? And so kind of an excellent example here is people who are overweight, right? There tends to be prejudice against people who are overweight, and it is acceptable to kind of criticize them, especially if they are women, right? And we know that, we probably instinctively know that sort of the attention on women's attractiveness and women's bodies is kind of disproportionate to men, but we'll get to that when we talk about sexism. So a few years ago, I wanted to show you this example here. And this is Cosmo magazine, right? So I don't know if you read Cosmo. It probably wouldn't shock you to hear that I don't, but Cosmo is a magazine usually targeted at women, right? There's lots of articles specific to women, lots of fashion advice, health advice, relationship advice. Yeah, it's a magazine for women for the most part. And on the cover, was this October of 2018. On October 2018, the cover model here was a model named Tess Holliday. And here's Tess, she's on the cover. And it was a very kind of controversial cover. A lot of people had something to say about it. This guy, Piers Morgan, do you know who he is? No? It's probably just as well. But he had some comments about Tess's appearance on the cover. And why do you think people, I know you don't have any background here, but why do you think people might have been kind of upset or had a reaction to Tess being on the cover here? Even if you're not an avid Cosmo reader. What's that?
They don't like it.
Well, yeah, and why might they not like it?
Doesn't fit.
Doesn't what?
It doesn't fit.
doesn't fit, right? Yeah, she's not really the type of model that we normally see on the cover of such magazines, right? We usually see a very slim model, right? Maybe even a model that's, unhealthily slim, but anyway, we usually see a slim model, and here we don't, right? And so people had kind of a reaction to it. Some people were very positive, right? Some people were, little hand clap emojis everywhere, right, all around. Some people like Piers Morgan were more critical, right? And so you can see here he says, as Britain battles an ever worsening obesity crisis, this is the new cover of Cosmo. Apparently we're supposed to view it as a huge step forward for body positivity. What a load of old baloney. That kind of means like that's false, right? This cover is just as dangerous and misguided as celebrating size 0 models. So there's a few things going on here, I think, but why do you think Piers Morgan felt that he should jump in here? Or why is he saying that he's jumping in? What's he commenting on? Yeah, what's he saying kind of in one sentence? What's his point?
Obesity is bad, and it's promoting.
Basically that's what he's saying, right? Obesity is bad, it's bad for your health, and we shouldn't be celebrating it here. We shouldn't be promoting it, right? This is bad, right? And let's think about this. Now, are there some negative stereotypes that exist for people who are overweight? Maybe particularly women, but not just women. Are there some stereotypes that people have about people who are overweight? What's that?
They eat a lot of fast food.
Yeah, that they eat a lot of fast food, right? What else might people think about them? More about like their character.
They're lazy.
Right? But people tend to look at people who are overweight and say, oh, these people are lazy, slow. You mean slow like up here? No, just like physically slow? Okay. Well, whatever. Slow. What else do we think? What do some people think? Do you think it's fair to say that the stereotype about people who are overweight or obese is that they're kind of lazy? Maybe they're not very smart. Maybe they're not disciplined, right? Maybe they eat a lot of fast food because they don't care about their health, right? They don't have enough, they don't have enough discipline to look after themselves, right? They don't care about themselves, right? All of these kind of negative things that we associate. And again, that's a textbook stereotype, right? The idea that I look at you, I see some visual information, and then I think I know something about you. Right? I think I know something about how you are inside, right? And again, I think the place we're trying to get to here is that you can't really do that in many cases, right? You can't look at someone and think you know who they are, because quite often you're not correct, right? So we do have a bunch of negative stereotypes about people who are overweight or obese. And here we have Piers Morgan kind of chiming in. And what's his motivation for saying this? What's he trying to do you think? What's he trying to accomplish? What do you think, Anna? What do you think?
Maybe help. Usually people think that when people
Yeah.
have more health and more healthy.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think he's kind of wrapping his comments in this package of health, right? Saying that in Britain we have this obesity crisis, it's negatively impacting people's health. You know, we need to be more responsible, right? We need to look after people's health. And I think there's probably some truth to that, don't you? I mean, people who are overweight are at greater risk for certain diseases and illnesses, right? We know that. But do you think that that's really why he's saying this?
No.
You don't think so? Why not?
He's just using that so he doesn't get hate. But he just doesn't want hate to cover.
So you think that he kind of looks at Tess and he's like, oh, that's not attractive, but he's wrapping it up. He's wrapping it up in saying, oh, you know, I'm just concerned about her health. Do you think that's what's happening? That makes sense? You like that one? Who thinks that that's what Piers Morgan is doing? He's actually what you say, he's fat shaming Tess Holliday here, right? He's criticizing her physical appearance, but he's wrapping it up in a cover of I'm concerned about her health. Who thinks he's doing that? Ooh, who doesn't think he's doing that? Who is not sure? You're not sure? Well, and I think, Irina, you're correct, right? It's impossible to know what his intention was, right? It's impossible to know what he was trying to do, right? And maybe he was trying to do something different than he thought he was trying to do, right? Because sometimes our subconscious, when I say subconscious, you know what I mean? Yeah. Sometimes our subconscious mind is kind of doing all kinds of other things, right? And it kind of motivates us to do things that we're not even sure why we did them, or we said something and we're like, I don't even know why I said that, right? So Irina's right. It's it's impossible to know what his true intention was. But I think there's probably a lot of people out there who would do this very thing, right? Who would be very open to criticizing Tess and then would kind of wrap it up with some other justification, right? I'm just concerned about the health of the nation, right? The health of Britain. I'm just concerned about Tess's health personally, right? But I don't know. I'm concerned that that's not really what's happening, right? I think he's criticizing her because she's overweight, right? And she's not typical of the models that we see on the cover of a magazine like this, right? And so again, there was a lot of positive comments for Tess, right? But there's a lot of negative stuff too, right? And I think you can imagine this is probably the least offensive criticism that was around. I'm sure you can imagine there was way worse stuff was said, right? But there's kind of more going on here, I think, with Tess, and just to give you some things to think about. So why might people, maybe if you agree with my read of Piers Morgan here, or the other people who I won't put their comments up, why do they feel so free to express their prejudice? Well, probably because they think that their prejudice is not a prejudice, it's a justified, that it's a fact, right? Let's say we're right, okay, and Piers Morgan is really fat shaming Tess Holliday. What he's doing is that he's saying that I see your body, right? I see your physical form, and that means I know something about you, right? I know that you're undisciplined or lazy or stupid, or that you don't care about your health, right? So I'm gonna scold you, right? Because you shouldn't be that way, right? You should be not lazy, right? You should care about your health. You should be careful with what you eat. You need to have discipline, right? You don't have any discipline. You need to have discipline, right? And there's lots of kind of shows like this. I don't know if have you ever seen The Biggest Loser television show, where they try to get people to lose weight and they put them on a diet, and then they give them a personal trainer who yells at them all the time, and they're running on a treadmill, and it's some people find it entertaining. I just find it brutal. But again, we're kind of allowed to do this because we see people being overweight as a physical failing, right? Tess is somehow less than the models that appear usually, right? Those models, again, and we talked about this yesterday too, we tend to be positively prejudiced towards good-looking people, don't we? Yeah, we tend to flirt with them a little bit. We tend to treat them a little nicer. We tend to assume that they are nicer, right? We tend to look at supermodels, right? All of the most beautiful supermodels, male or female, whatever you want. We tend to think of them as, good people, right? Who are so disciplined, right? And they're careful with their diet and they're exercising and they're doing all these things. And again, there's some truth to that. I think that those supermodels are eating well and doing their exercise. But is their appearance solely due to their own effort? Did they make themselves beautiful, or were they born that way?
They were born that way, but then they maintained it.
Right. So they kind of won the genetic lottery, didn't they? Who's a supermodel? Name one for me. Dwayne Johnson?
Yeah.
Okay, not a supermodel, but a heck of an attractive man. He might not be the best example for this. Who?
Kendall Jenner.
Kendall Jenner. Okay, Kendall Jenner. So Kendall's kind of won the genetic lottery, right? She is born and she just happens to be beautiful, right? It's not her fault, right? She just is how she is. Her genetics, she didn't choose her genes, right? They were randomly selected and here she is, right? Does she maintain it? Sure, right? She pays attention to what she eats. She probably does some exercise here and there. I suspect she doesn't have to do a ton, right? I suspect as long as she doesn't, just go hog wild on the nachos, I assume that she's probably always going to look like that, right? So she kind of won the genetic lottery. Her looks are not really due to her effort, and they're not really due to anything about how she is on the inside, right? But we assume, maybe even subconsciously, that it is, right? We assume that she's beautiful, therefore she must be beautiful on the inside. She must be a diligent hard worker and careful with her diet, and she takes care of herself, right? And we might think that, Tess is the exact opposite of that, right? She's not disciplined. She doesn't care about what she eats. She's a disaster, right? But is that really fair? Did Tess choose the body that she's in? No, right? She randomly got her genes just like Kendall did, right? Kendall got genes that turned her into something that people think is beautiful. Tess got genes that, maybe less people think is beautiful, right? And so both of these women kind of came into their physical bodies not through any choice or or characteristic about themselves. And again, we can modify our bodies, right? But only to a certain degree, right? I imagine that no matter what Tess does, I'm gonna have to wrap this up in 5 minutes, this is gonna be tough. No matter what Tess does, she's never gonna look like Kendall Jenner, right? Because, humans are built on a skeleton, right? We have a skeleton, and our skeletons are certain dimensions, right? And our muscles kind of layer on there in a specific way, right? And some of us are genetically prone to have more body fat than others, right? Some of us actually create new fat cells very easily, right? Some of us don't, right? Those are the people that just they're like eating all the time and they eat anything and they don't gain any weight, right? Their bodies work in such a way that they don't happen to store extra fat very easily. Some people do. Some people, look at a cupcake and they gain a pound, right? So people are different, right? Their bodies work in a different way. And again, that's not your choosing either, right? Not to mention, Kendall Jenner was born into a very wealthy family, right, who had all of the advantages that one could ask for, and a mother who kind of taught her marketing and how to promote herself, right? So Kendall's born with a lot of advantages, right? And so she's been very successful. Tess has been successful as well in a different way. But again, you know, her appearance is not entirely her choice, right? Part of it is, but part of it isn't. But it's the same thing with Kendall Jenner. Part of her appearance is her choice, but a good part of it isn't either, right? And so what's happening here is that, you know, I think he's rationalizing his prejudice by a concern for health, when really, you know, Tess is just different, right? Not everyone is built like Kendall Jenner, right? Everyone is built different, right? If we look at The Rock's Dwayne Johnson's a little bit different, right? He's a good-looking man, is he not? He's also worked a lot on his body, right? Spent a lot of hours in the gym. Part of it comes from genetics, right? If you look at his dad was a pretty muscular guy too. His dad was a wrestler, right? So he's got some genetic advantage. He's a good-looking man, spent a lot of time in the gym, but he didn't choose his genetics either, right? Do you think that if I spent as much time in the gym as The Rock, I could be as big as him and as muscular? Probably not, actually. I don't. This is the other thing, is that he may, and I suspect he does, his genetics allow him to gain muscle much more easily. I think he's got the genes that help him build muscle, and in part that's why he's so big. He's done the work, right? He's been in the gym, he's eaten, you know, all this protein and stuff like that. But I don't think I could get as big as him. And again, I've tried a little bit in the gym. I don't gain muscle very easily. And so I could probably work very hard, but I would never look like him, because I'm not built that way. I'm not as big as him, and I just don't gain muscle like he does. So, you know, he's done a lot of work, but also his genes are helping him out as well, right? He's a good-looking man, and he puts on muscle probably reasonably well, right? Again, he's done a lot of work, but his genes are helping him out. Where am I going with this? Good question. Again, we're assuming that people's appearance is entirely a reflection of who they are on the inside, right? Dwayne Johnson is handsome and is ripped as anything and looks incredible. Wow, he must be incredible. Turns out he actually is. But so he's not a great example here. But again, his success is not entirely due to his hard work. Some of it is, but not all of it, right? And Tess, even if we feel that her body is kind of less desirable, her body is not entirely of her choosing either, right? Her genetics may be such that, yeah, she puts on fat much more easily, or her body is kind of wired to carry more fat than average, right? But that's not her doing either, right? She just happens to fall outside of what society feels is normal, right? Or what society feels is beautiful. And again, that doesn't apply for everyone, right? Not everyone likes slim models. There's lots of guys out there who love Tessa's body and loves how she looks, right? But again, Piers Morgan and other people feel comfortable expressing their prejudice because they think that her physical appearance is indicative of who she is on the inside, right? That she's lazy and she doesn't care and she doesn't look after herself, and she needs to. Tisk, 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 right? Whereas there are lots of skinny people out there who don't look after their health either and are lazy, but it turns out their body just doesn't store fat like that. And so they look slim, right? But there's no difference here, right? It's not about, it's about what people see on the outside. It's not about who they are on the inside. But again, Piers Morgan and others feel very comfortable criticizing people like this, and especially women, because they think that it reflects something about who that person is on the inside, and it doesn't. Right? It doesn't matter. I don't know if I did a good job with that, but does that make sense? That's kind of a tricky one to navigate. But there's also, this is the last thing I'll say, but there's also some gender things around this too, right? Because the way we think about beauty is gendered, the way we think about men and women's bodies is gendered. There's a lot of focus on women's bodies and particular ways that women should look. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit in the sexism chapter, but I'll maybe press pause on it for now. Okay. Good? Okay, that is it. Come back tomorrow. We'll finish up with privilege, and then we'll look at ableism. Okay? What's that? When ableism. Yeah, we'll find out. Okay, see you all tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon.